to Talking Absolute Worship. We're looking at Advent 2 and continuing the Advent themes. And I'm going to ask Rachel, where are you going this week, Rachel?
Well, I'm not entirely sure where I'm going this week, but I think the mood of the readings is you're still in that hopeful area, but with a lot less despair, I feel. So I feel like we're moving from the despair, hopefully, in towards some kind of joyful anticipation of what's to come. So there's some kind of excitement building about this new era that's coming in, that's going to be marked with joy and righteousness and peace. And I think the psalm, that's kind of from Isaiah, and the psalm sort of brings in the idea that, yes, you know, we're grateful for our salvation, but now we need a new intervention. So we need God, you know, we're thankful for what God's done, but come on, God, we need something new. So there's this new era coming, and God is speaking comfort and well-being and assurance to the people in exile. So it feels to me like this Advent hope is kind of grounded in a reminder of God's faithfulness and activity in the past, but also a reminder that God is doing new stuff and that we're looking to this new era. So I love the Isaiah bit anyway, so that's where my thoughts were going. It feels a bit more tangible this week. Advent 2 definitely feels like God is on the move. There seems to be, it's not so much where are you, God, but look, God is doing things. The other thing that I do quite like, it's from 2 Peter, and I like the way that that there's this kind of excuse for why Jesus hasn't come back yet, and it's God's giving the maximum amount of time for as many people as possible to kind of come into this. So I do like that idea of getting ready and God giving everyone this great opportunity to know God's love, and the idea of preparing yourself in that waiting time and preparing our communities. I think it's there's quite a lot of global stuff going on in the readings this week, so it feels to me much less individually focused, but much more kind of global. So I'm sorry, I've got nothing very coherent to say, but there are a few of my ramblings about where I might begin.
I think that's pretty coherent, yeah. Isaiah is sounding like he's cheered up a bit, doesn't he, really? Although I think that doesn't really work because we've kind of gone backwards, haven't we? So this is before he was speaking last week. So last week he got a bit gloomier. Where are you, God? Whereas this week there's a huge highway being built in the desert, which sounds positive, doesn't it? And maybe that's something that people need to hear with this whole COVID thing. Asking the government what's our way out of this, and here's a straight easy road, a massive highway, you can't possibly get lost on it, and we kind of feel like we've been offered a spaghetti junction, don't we, of roads going off in all directions and going round and round and back on each other, and this sounds good, this highway, if we could sort of grip a hold of it as a more I like the progression idea. I don't think I'd really grasped that, so that's cool. We're getting more hopeful. The lights are getting brighter. There's 2 on the Advent ring now. So maybe next week, let's hope the progression continues. Where are you going, Lithan?
Well, I was just thinking when you were talking then about the fact that there are some straight paths being made in the UK at the moment for HS2. And what's happening is that things are being bulldozed without thought or care, I would say. So I read the other day that an oak tree, I think it was, that was 450 years old or something, has just been destroyed because it's not even, the trains won't actually go over where it was. It's just in order to make things happen. And it's about, that's not what God's doing. God isn't just going, boom, I'm going to put this down and this is the straight road and I'm going to destroy everything. He's not like the Romans either, who I think probably did some of that with their lovely straight roads that we like in the UK now, because most of ours wander. He does this with justice and with care. Well, I was thinking about that whole thing about comfort not meaning fabric conditioner or coziness, but it's kind of with strength, you know, God's there with strength, but with care as well. And it feels a bit like having penalty points taken off your license. I've never had any, so I don't exactly know what it's like, Phil, but that's that sense of it being wiped clean. You know, there are things that you've done and that time's over, and now we're in a different time, a time when God is acting, and he's acting. It's a very long passage, isn't it, for us to concentrate on? So I might split it up. If I was doing this, I'd probably talk about the different bits of Isaiah, because I think for people, although it's only 11 verses, it's a lot of words. So it might be that I talk about the different bits. So that idea that the penalty's paid, and then that it will be made easier for us to go around. And maybe that's going back to something Ruth said last time about agency and pathways, that God's creating the pathways that we need to make sense of our life. But there's a lot of there's a properly worked out escape plan, which sounds good. I've just been in a pre-meeting about preparation for a second lockdown. So the idea is, last time we were locked down and we all had to scrabble to work out what was going to happen, and that maybe if there's another one, we'll kind of have much more of a sense of what we can do and who's going to do it, and that God will, that's what God does. God knows exactly what he's going to do, and he's not just going there, he's going to gather the lambs, feed the flock, carry them, lead them to the mother sheep, and save the people. So there's a lot of practical things here that God's doing that he might be calling us to do as well. And I noted that we will be in between November and December. I can't remember what, it's early December, the date of Advent 2. And December the 1st, 1955 is the day that Rosa Parks sat on the bus and said, I'm not going to move. And she kind of did it because she was tired, but it was also that she'd had enough. You know, it's like, it's saying, I've had enough of having to live this way, and it's time to make a difference. And maybe these verses are also challenging us to say we've had enough of how things were, and that if straight paths are to be made, sometimes we're going to do this too, but it will involve hardship and struggle. Filling a pothole isn't as easy as you might think it is. Making a path straight isn't always easy to do, but there's hope in this again. Then the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all people shall see it together. And that's what we're working towards, is that God's glory will be revealed to all people.
I presume, and I'm hoping there's somebody here that knows something about the Bible, that this, for Isaiah, this image of a straight road being made for a royal visitation was a thing, and that in those days they would make a straight road through the desert so that the king's carriage didn't get jiggled and joggled, or fall into a pothole or whatever. I'm presuming that's true. I don't know it's true, but it kind of reminded me, and this is not a very positive way, of the stuff about the royal wedding. The last one we had, I forget which one got married last. Was it? No idea. Harry, maybe one of them. And they were sweeping homeless people off the street in order that the royal entourage could come through. And people could sleep on the streets as long as they were ones that were going to be waving the Union Jacks, but the other people who were sleeping on the streets, who needed to sleep on the streets, were all getting swept off. And I don't know, I kind of wanted to play with that in preaching a bit about what kind of royalty this is, maybe harking back to the Reign of Christ Sunday. What kind of road is this? So Isaiah is piling on the imagery, isn't it? As Lytton points out, there's a lot of imagery in here. There's the grass withering imagery that we haven't touched on. There's the straight road imagery. There's the comforting imagery that Rachel was talking about, and it's just such a richness in Isaiah for us to grab hold of. I wonder, whether we need to pick our horse and go with it rather than try and include the whole lot. I think I'd lose the scope. Ruth?
Just as you were talking about the royal road, I think I've always thought as well that royal road becomes the road by which the people who are cared for by God and shepherded and all of that can then return from exile to the land. So it's not a one-way street. It allows God to come to his people, but it also allows the people to return to the place where they have first known God. So I think that's where it differs from things like HS2 or sweeping away homeless people. That this is a road for all God's people, which kind of ties in a bit as well with the 2 Peter. Rachel was just saying, that God wishes everybody to be part of this and wishes everybody to use this road. So I don't know whether it's just me being over democratic, but it feels like it's a road for everybody. It's not just a road for special people to use. So God is flinging open the way so that everybody can traverse it.
Yeah, that helps. That helps me on that. I don't think I'd ever thought of it as a 2-way road before. But presumably they don't go and destroy the road after the king's been. The road still, that would be a bit of a waste of resources, wouldn't it? So yeah, I think that's helpful. Yeah, thank you. Rachel?
I think also with the idea of that 2-way road is that we've got to choose to get on the road, and it's not the kind of let's just sit around and wait for God to pick us up and plonk us at the other end of it, but we've got to choose to get on the road, and then we've got to choose to walk or however we're going to go along the road. It's about us taking some responsibility for collaborating with God, I think, as well.
I probably ought to get too sucked into this whole road metaphor, but as a motorcycle rider on a motorcycle sat-nav, when you pick your route, motorcycle sat-navs will offer you the twistiest, bendiest route, because motorcyclists like twisty, bendy routes, and they don't like long, straight routes. So maybe I need to readjust. Although I know there's a part of me that says, no, I'd much rather have a meandering route than a straight up. My journey to God isn't a straight highway, and never has been. My journey towards God has been a twisting, pothole-filled, meandering route that doesn't always go in the direction it's supposed to be going in. I think I might play with that. I think there might be some mileage in it. I'm not quite sure where it will go, and also the road less travelled and all that kind of stuff you might weave in. Maybe roads is one metaphor to flog to death. On Advent too. Where are you going, Ruth? Where are you going with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really like the 2 Peter reading, and I had to remind myself who wrote it and who for, and it's one of the letters that isn't a letter from a person to some other people. We were looking at Corinthians last time, but it's although it's written in the form of a letter, and it's written supposedly as a letter from Simon Peter, almost as a kind of a last will and testament, kind of, before I go, I better write all this down. But commentators agree, which means I don't know, but somebody else says that it was written about 150 AD or Common Era. So it was probably a leader of the church trying to kind of say, this is the nub of what it's all about, and kind of coalesce people around an agreed sense of what's going on. And then this bit that we had about the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night, it comes towards the end of the letter. So it's obviously, or it feels to me as though it's an important bit. It's not a kind of, oh yeah, and there's this bit about second coming. It feels as though that would have been a real issue for people who thought it was going to come really quickly, and then it didn't. And then 2,000 years later, we're still kind of waiting and wondering. So that, for me, feels like a helpful way of saying, well, first of all, time's different for God, so you can't hold God to your timetable. And then I like the bit about, so while you're waiting, be holy and godly, and be at peace. And I thought, well, actually, that's pretty good advice, whether it's the state of the world or it's, why hasn't Jesus come back and sorted it out, or why doesn't God do something? However we're feeling, whatever we're waiting for, the idea that we're not let off the hook. So God is doing these things and will do more things, but that doesn't leave us let off the hook. But then there is the be at peace. So it's not for us. We don't have to get in there with the pitchforks and build this road for God to travel on. We can be at peace and concentrate on what it is that we do in this already and not yet kind of time of the kingdom.
Where are you going, Neil?
A couple of, obviously I would agree with all of you. A couple of things that struck me. I think I also was particularly drawn to the 2 Peter. I think partly, if I'm entirely honest, because I suspect in my preaching, the epistles don't always get a huge look in, because I'm always really keen to do something with the Old Testament and something with the New. And I suspect, especially not least in a season like Advent, tempting to head into the gospel. I think that sense in 2 Peter of kind of that God's way of working has to be allowed to be God's way of working. And maybe in this particular Advent, with everything that we're reflecting on about how much the virus has unpicked of the way we would normally operate, and many of the things that we used to take for granted we can't anymore, and we're in all sorts of different ways we're both celebrating and floundering around as we try to live this strange world of ours. Here's a text that kind of, in a sense, signals that by saying, even something as simple as how you count time doesn't work when you try to apply it to God. So what's the solution? And I'm just really struck, as Ruth was talking, I'm just struck at how that verse 15 concludes. Regard the patience of our Lord as salvation, which is that's an amazing phrase. It would be interesting to build a sermon around what on earth does it mean to live as a community of people who regard the patience of our Lord as our salvation. That sense of kind of, what does it mean to be watchful and waiting and do that well and accept that we'll do that, that's our lives. And maybe that the pandemic is highlighting that for us. But actually this text was always there. We didn't need the pandemic to read this text, but maybe this text comes alive this year precisely because so much of what we would normally plan and control, we can't. The other thing that I was struck by, so I'm afraid this is a completely different thought. So do you want me to stop and come back to it?
No, crack on.
Crack on. There's always something interesting about what the lectionary leaves out. And it's kind of interesting with the psalm that the bit the lectionary leaves out is the bit about God being angry and punishing us. And it, you can see why, for the flow of this Sunday, not least after the previous Sunday where we've had no little amount of stuff about God being angry. But it is interesting, if you leave that middle bit of the psalm out, I think in a way it plays down the movement that happens in the psalm. Because the psalm begins positively, then acknowledges we've really messed up, and then comes back to saying, but God, you haven't forsaken us. And so another thought I had was this might be a Sunday when actually we might quite deliberately want to say there's a bit that the lectionary has left out that actually helps us to understand what this text is about. And the danger is we've almost, with the lectionary, slightly proof texted the psalm so that it just says, the really nice positive stuff. And again, that I think would be something that would resonate with where we are. That actually, we can't just put a sticking plaster on a pandemic. There's real agony and tragedy going on this Advent. Globally, and we've got to sing the Lord's song into that.
Yeah, trust Neil to be the Grinch who ruined the joy of Advent. That Rachel was telling us was getting more. I think Rachel wants to respond. Yes, Rachel.
I do want to respond because these is although I kind of pretty much ignored Mark. I did read the passage, and it's obviously familiar about John the Baptist as being, very definitely, Mark is definitely signalling that, this is the one that Isaiah was going on about by quoting Isaiah and all of that. And sometimes you feel you're on familiar ground in Advent with John the Baptist, don't you? Because he comes around every year and you sort of, you sort of know where you are. But I was reading a commentary, and it was drawing all the sort of similarities between John and Jesus, that they'd got the wilderness in common, and they were both in the business of proclamation and calling to repentance. But then it said, this really stuck in my mind, John becomes the forerunner in being handed over to death. So it says, even from the beginning of Mark's gospel, we see that the one who is coming will be betrayed and die. And I'd never put that together before. So that kind of, I just was reminded of that when Neil was speaking, because there is some sense of the kind of tragedy within it. I know we're trying to be more hopeful this week, but actually you could take it down a different route in thinking about what's Jesus coming for.
Yeah. Well, no, obviously I was joking. There is real tragedy in the world and in people, so we can't ignore that fact. We can't just say, now's the time for being jolly. It's week 2, and then we'll just get more and more jolly as we approach Christmas. I don't know. I think if I didn't go with the overblown road analogy, I'd go with the flowers fading and the grass withering, because I think that's lots of people's experience of life at the moment. Not just watching, I'm sure you've all heard, like I have, the heartrending accounts of people talking about parents or relatives in nursing homes who they haven't been able to see, and they feel they're just being left to wither, and their lives being impoverished by the lack of human contact. And I think it's quite a powerful image that everybody can grasp. The things we put our hope in, and we think, my garden's all withering at the moment now. The dahlias are pretty much done. The tomatoes have got blight. There's a lot of withering going on in my garden. And it's that kind of year where it's a natural sort of language to be aware of. It's all being pulled up and put in the compost heap. There's not much of the last week's unfurling leaves of spring. We're heading into winter. So I think the grass fading and the flowers, no, the other way around, flowers fading and the grass withering, might express some of that in Isaiah's picture language for this week. So I'm not really sure whether I'll go with that or whether I'll go with the roads. I quite like the roads though. So I'll think about it. So obviously rich imagery, rich passages for the context of worship.
Can I just jump in to say, I mean, just that I think it's really important that we help people to see, you know, the Bible wasn't just written by jolly people having a jolly time and their jolly God helped them be even more jolly, you know, but that also it comes out of places of pain and struggle, and so that, you know, it is clear. But I am struck by it is the beginning of Mark's gospel. So he does begin with, this is the beginning of the good news. And the idea that we have a God who speaks into, comes into and transforms the life we know, which can sometimes be hard and difficult. I think it's that kind of hanging on to that. And yeah, in a time when there will be people who want to say, oh, it's nearly Christmas now, so let's, you know, let's try and forget about COVID. Let's try and forget, you know, let's have a good time. It would be lovely to have a good time. But it's also important to say, but it is hard and it has been hard, and there will be an awful lot of grieving going on this Christmas. And there'll be a lot of empty places at dinner tables, whether that's because we can't actually gather or because somebody's died or whatever. So it would be foolish for us to preach, but it's good news, so it's okay. We're not saying that, but we are saying despite that, and in the middle of that. And I really like the idea that, John the Baptist not only is ahead of Jesus in the gathering disciples and talking about repentance in the desert, but he's ahead of Jesus in dying. The idea that, you know, it's not all made all right, happy ending, and we flip straight to the happy ending. We know that there's the gritty bit in the middle for John, and then for Jesus, and for us. But yet, it's good news.
And John the Baptist doesn't die a sort of a brave last stand fighting against the powers of darkness death. It's a ignominious, horrible encounter in the cells from some nonsense at a party in the King's Palace, isn't it? It's not unlike the gritty awfulness of what happens with Jesus. Well, it's no surprise to my congregation I like Mark's Gospel. It's yrB. Mark is ace. He just gets straight into it. It's just bam. Here it is. We're already at John the Baptist, and we haven't even got to Christmas. He doesn't mess about bothering with the details of birth stories and stuff. It's almost like he's just so eager to get into the meat of this story. So when that's what I thought of when Ruth said, yes, Mark, this is the beginning. Here we are. This is the start. I'm not going to fanny about giving you all these extraneous details about birth stories and angels and shepherds and stuff. This is the heart of it. And Mark is just like that, isn't he? And suddenly this happened, and then that happened, and you think the whole ministry of Jesus took about 4 days that we've got in these readings, and the fact that it's Advent 2. We'll go around in some kind of random order. Ruth, what have you been thinking about?
I thought about, hopefully we are gathering somewhat by the time we get to Advent, still gathering either by Zoom or in buildings. Well, certainly be doing it by Zoom, but I'm hoping there'll be some sense of a congregational presence for our churches in Advent. But I'm conscious that people will be thinking about all the things they can't do. So they can't sing all the carols, and they can't have a nativity scene with children with tea towels on their heads or whatever. And so I thought, is there something here that we can do? Because it was the Isaiah 40, and I remembered the Comfort Now My People. I'll play the first bit for you in a minute, which is in Common Ground and also, I guess, in CH4, which has a really interesting rhythm. And I'll just play the first bit for you, and it's available on YouTube, so you can just hear. I just love this introduction because the bloke with the drum is really going for it, and that's going to be the basis of what I'm going to try and do with a congregation. So bear with me a second while I make sure I share the sound as well as the picture. So just watch out for Billy on the bongos. Sorry to cut you off in your prime, but you can listen to the whole thing for yourself. But anyone who can sit still during that is some sort of psychopath, because the rhythm's great. And I was thinking about the clapping for the NHS back at the beginning of lockdown. And certainly around here, it got wilder and wilder. So people got pots and pans and spoons, and we have quite a range of percussion instruments, like you do. And so we were taking out different instruments every time. So I've got a baran, and we've got some sleigh belly type things, and glockenspiel one week, and so on. So it did get quite fun to see what people were doing to make that joyful noise. And I just thought it'd be great to do that for Advent 2 and encourage people to make a joyful noise, because they can't sing, but you can clap, you can jingle your keys, you can wave your hands if you want to. I don't think you can dance in the aisles, because I think that's probably, better stay in your seat. And if you're on Zoom, of course, people can do absolutely whatever they like. So I would love, if I'm in a Zoom service, I think I'll say to people, make sure you've got something that makes a noise, and you can make a noise. And we might just have a little bit with it not on mute, because I know it's cacophonous, but mostly just encouraging people to let go, and to do that together in a way that rejoices in the comfort. And certainly for me, making music together brings me comfort. The very first service I did, live service after lockdown, the most moving bit of the service was when we said the Lord's Prayer together, because I realised that I hadn't done something corporate like that in a church for 5 months at that point. And it was just, even though we were mumbling into our masks and all of that, it was just that sense of God's people doing this together. So I'd like to capture a bit of that, but also a bit of joy, because I love that piece of music and I love the rhythm. Yeah,
that congregation was doing a very good job at not moving. So even though that bongo player was going out of his way, they were all sat there.
Yep.
There's a Lectionary version of that as well, isn't there, with a flute?
Yes, I think it is that, but yeah, with extra twiddles. I don't think we could hear the flautist enough.
No.
Over Billy on the bongos.
On the bongos, it's lovely.
Of course, a slightly different, but also compulsory Advent 2 piece of music is the Messiah, isn't it? Comfort ye, my people. I don't think I've ever done an Advent 2 without incorporating that in there sometime. Lithan?
I think I have done a whole service, and it would be an option to do that, because almost all, I think apart from the flower in the field, almost all of that Isaiah 40 is 6 or 7 different pieces from Handel's Messiah. So you could do something, if you're in that kind of congregation, do something where you say a little bit, ask people to reflect, and then play the portion of the Messiah that fits.
There is a book on the shelves behind you somewhere called Christmas with Isaiah that basically does that. I think we did it for some Bible studies through Advent one year, and we played a bit of the Messiah, and then we reflected on the words. So it's basically just a different way of reading the Bible.
There's also talking. Our church meets a school that has a lot of drums, and I think it does help if we've got proper drums rather than percussion instruments, although it could work with maracas. But we've done a thing that I got taught at a Methodist Pioneers Conference about drumming. Now, we did drumming the psalm, but I think you could drum the prophet as well. So you get everyone used to using a drum and beating on it, and then you read through the Isaiah passage together, then you read it on your own, and then you find a phrase that really speaks to you, and you work out the pattern of it as you drum, and then gradually get everyone to do their drumming at the same time, and then talk about it afterwards. And that's quite a different way of looking at the passage. But once people shed their inhibitions about drumming, because we start off like the choir and end up like Billy on the bongo, it kind of does free you up to think in a very different way, and focusing on one phrase and hearing what people's responses is quite useful. But you probably need to do that live rather than on Zoom, I think.
Yeah, that's
While
cool.
I'm talking, I found something else. Let's see if I can share the screen with the right one. I did find Prepare the Way of the Lord from Godspell, which I won't play. You can see the shocked woman on the screen here. What I like about it is I hadn't realised in the film that it kind of all happens in the midst of every day. So I think that's quite a good way that suddenly in the midst of whatever's going on in the street, you hear John do the Prepare the Way of the Lord. And I have sometimes started Advent 2 service with playing the Godspell with that sound, because it's just so evocative. But I wanted to really find, let's see if I can find the right one.
Is that the yrB, is it called, or something like that?
It could be, yes. So now, and then that was the same one. Ah, here we go. So this is people in Times Square doing Isaiah 40. So they just got random people off the street in Times Square, New York. Lots of British people, to my surprise, sharing different sentences from it. I was slightly insulted for some Asian people got subtitles when no one else did. But I'll just give you a flavour, because it's really interesting to watch, but it could also be something that we could do in our communities, get people to record a bit and then put it all together if you've got someone clever like that.
Comfort my people, says your God.
Speak tenderly to Jerusalem,
and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed,
that her sins have been paid for,
that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins.
a voice of one calling.
in the desert prepare the way for the Lord.
There you go, that'll do, but that gives you an idea. It's really, it's cool, isn't it?
Very
I
cool.
haven't got the technology to put the bits together, so I'd need to find someone to do that, but I really like that idea.
That's very cool indeed. It's very cool indeed. Neil, where are you going?
I guess a couple of things. One was just playing around with that whole sense of timing again, that, you know, God's timing, our timing. I mean, I think you could play with this either if you were gathering in a building or if you were on Zoom and everyone was, you know, separated. But just think about timelines. Think about, you know, maybe the life of this particular congregation, and just get a great long sheet of wallpaper, lining paper, and draw it out, and begin to invite people to start to add in things into that story, you know, and depending on who was in the congregation and people's ages and where they'd come from, you'd start to get a whole mass of things. And I think that could be quite evocative in terms of just, you know, thinking about the time we live through, but then what does it mean to see God's story woven into that? So that was one thought I had. The other, though, and I mean, this wouldn't work for everyone, but an awful lot of people nowadays in our congregations are walking around every day with quite a high quality camera in their pockets or in their bags. And I thought it might be fun to just invite people in the week before to take a photo of something that has made them stop and think that actually God is at work in the midst of the turmoil and reality of our daily lives. Whatever that, and don't necessarily have to make any comment, you know, and don't turn it into some sort of ghastly psychoanalysis of why you took the photograph of the toadstool in the way that you did or whatever. But actually, you know, you could easily then, if you had enough time, download those photos into a PowerPoint and just let them play, and just let them be a visual testimony, a bit of witness that actually for this church, for this community, for us, here are some images that have made some of us think this stuff that we're reading is true.
Cool. I love all the ideas that put a kind of an emphasis of the interpretation of God's word onto those who were attending or those who were part of the worship rather than just the minister. So the vox pop thing of getting people to read out bits of Isaiah, of doing photographs of things that have arrested your attention this week. That's all. That's such liturgies, isn't it? The voice of the people, allowing that to be alive in worship, I think is fabulous, and maybe something that actually we can do with COVID that was less easy to do otherwise. I had a visual idea. You may not like this. This kind of works if you're in a building and if you've got a reasonable, I know these are difficult to find, like a reasonable flower arranger who can be negotiated with. Because of Isaiah's language, I wondered how people would respond to having the flower arrangement that was like faded flowers and withered grass, instead of the splendid thing because it's like a centerpiece, isn't it? Usually at the front of the church, and you've got these dead flowers. I think it'd be quite striking. I've never quite picked up the nerve to ask a flower arranger to do that. But let's face it, dead flowers are cheaper, so that's one thing. The other idea I had was about Mark's Gospel, starting Mark's Gospel, and the opening lines of Mark's Gospel, and it kind of made me think, oh, that's sort of a fun way of starting a sermon or introducing a theme of Mark's Gospel. You could do like a quiz, couldn't you? Either of famous novels, which is a bit tedious because there are some people who know that and some people who don't. Or Bible books. You could just take the first line of several Bible books and see if your congregation could actually name this book from the first line. I know I'd be rubbish at, so I'd be the quiz master, obviously, because I just wouldn't be able to do any of them. I might manage John's Gospel. I don't know where you go with that, but I think it was sparked in my head when Neil said about Mark's Gospel, this is the beginning of something. This is the start of something. It could lead into that kind of sermon. This is the start of something. Advent and Advent 2. What is it the start of? Well, I'll give that some thought, but it's the start of something. Anyway, who haven't I come to? I've lost track now. Rachel.
I had a couple of thoughts of things that I could play around with. One is similar to Neil's timeline idea, only I was thinking more of the kind of the roadway idea, so that people wherever they are, because there's not going to be if you're in a building, you can't do a lot of interaction within the building, but maybe give people some paper, and they can do it at home as well, just to kind of plot out their sort of life journey, but also their faith journey within that, and perhaps see how things combine. Where do they feel that they've been particularly close to God, and does that coincide with a happy time of life or a sad time of life? Perhaps get people to reflect a bit on that. So that was one thought I had. The other thought was sort of loosely based around 2 Peter, because the thought that came to my mind when I was reading 2 Peter was, well, my husband, he's been working away in Cyprus for 2 months now, and he's still got another month before he comes back. So I was thinking there's part of me that would really love him to come back today, because I haven't seen him for 2 months. But on the other hand, he's the tidy person, and the house is a complete state at the minute, and I haven't dusted anything, and actually I haven't even hoovered anything. And there's piles of stuff all over the place, and there's wool all over the living room because I haven't bothered to put it away at the end of the day before I go to bed and stuff like that. So although I would love him to be back right now, at the same time I'm thinking, hang on a minute, I'm going to need at least a week to get things organised. So I was wondering if there's any mileage in getting people to think about the kind of things they put off, and maybe to take an opportunity in the week ahead to think of one of those things. And that could be a practical round the house thing, but it might be actually, I've been meaning to get in touch with this person, or I really wanted to tell this person that they really blessed me by doing this, and I never got round to it. And maybe encourage some kind of positive action in the week ahead.
That's cool. Yeah, I really like that idea. It's I mean, we've all got that feeling as someone's coming quick. What's that cartoon they had about Jesus is coming quick, look busy, or something? Ruth.
Well, I've just finished reading a book about grief by Julia Samuel, who is a therapist, and she made a point that kind of never really occurred to me before, that it's never too late to express your care for someone who's grieving. And she said, you might think, oh, I've been meaning to write a card, and now it's 3, 6, a year, 18 months on. But actually, given that most people respond very quickly, it can be that your card that comes 6 months later actually reaches a person when they most need it. And you could start your card by saying, I have been thinking about you a lot, but I realised I hadn't sent a card, and so blah, blah. And just as you were saying about getting around to doing something, that maybe picking up on the comfort idea, is there someone that you could comfort, and encourage people to think it's never too late, because we all know we want comfort. It's not that you say, oh, I'm sorry, I needed your comfort 2 weeks ago. Mostly people would just be glad to get it now. So I thought those two things kind of fit together.
Yeah, I like that.
It certainly fits this time of year when a number of churches do blue Christmases or memorial services with funeral directors, don't they? And that certainly fits in there. I'm not sure if I saw this or did this as an exercise once, reflecting on Rachel's thing about your own road and the journey of life. I saw once where you were supposed to, maybe we did it at college, I don't know, where you drew your thing and it was in terms of an up and down thing, an up and down timeline. I suppose you're supposed to be some vague idea of happy or sad. And then when you'd done that, and only after you'd done that, they then said, now I want you to go through the same timeline with using the same line and colour it blue or red, as in hot or cold, as to where you felt closest to God. And I think most people thought that the up times would be the times when they felt closest to God, but it actually wasn't. It was the lower times. I don't know whether that might chime in with Neil's church timeline. It probably seems like a very good thing for a minister just starting in a church, to get a grip of what it is that the church thinks is important about its history and where it's come from and what its journey has been. And is there such a thing in church life where a whole church feels close to God? I wonder whether we have that same idea that the people of Israel did. We seem to have this idea that the whole people felt close to God, or the whole people felt God was ignoring them, or the whole people felt. I don't think we have that so much. We're a lot more individualistic about how our world works, aren't we?
There can be times in the life of a church when you feel things have gone wrong, the wheels have come off the wagon. Just thinking about some of the churches in the synod, there are times definitely when a church is going through a bad time, and I think there are churches, sadly, where there's a repeating pattern, which is not just about the individuals. A lot of the individuals may have moved on, but there's something in the life of the church that there's a kind of a pattern that repeats. It wouldn't do for me to be specific, but I think I do recognise that can happen.
Yeah, fair point. Neil?
Well, yeah. I think interestingly, I was thinking of Ruth's experience of everyone saying the Lord's Prayer. And I think, again, interestingly, one of the things perhaps the pandemic is doing for us is it's highlighting those moments, whether it's when we started standing on the doorstep clapping the NHS, or the first time back in a building where we were able to say something into our mask. In one of the churches that I'm now serving in, it was absolutely palpable, the feeling people had when they heard the organ played for the first time since March. And it was spellbinding. I mean, partly because it was an amazing piece of playing, and it's a lovely acoustic and so on. But I realized that part of what was going on was that collectively here was a bunch of people who had been denied something and who had denied themselves it because they wanted to do all the right things and they've obeyed all of the rules. And now here was an opportunity to do something, to reconnect. And it might be perhaps that this is an Advent in which that sense of reconnecting with some of the profound things that we almost don't notice, but we can reconnect with them this year will be really important.
Listen.
I just think what Neil was saying just fits so well with that Isaiah reading about, that time's over and now you can, the penalty's paid, you can listen to the organ again, but and there's in a sense it is the now and the not yet, that we know there are some things we can do again, but it's not finished. But I haven't quite got the whole of that ready yet, but it just resonated really well there.
Oh, yeah. My church was the same with the Lord's Prayer and with the organ. They don't have a regular organist, but they shipped one in who is missing playing the organ at her church, so she comes to play at ours every other Sunday. So and they just sit there spellbound because the organ's playing. And I say, well, I've got some nice music on a CD. No, we want the organ. I think I've kind of failed to understand it, and you've helped me a bit understand why it is that they're so spellbound by this pipey monstrosity at the front of the church. Any other ideas? No, I think that's plenty to keep us going. We've been talking absolute worship for an hour or so, maybe a bit less. It's an important task that we're engaged in and that you're engaged in, and we want to leave you with a prayer that as you prepare your services, you'll be bringing people closer into that connection with God. Ruth's going to lead us in prayer.
Thank you. Loving God, we give you thanks that we can be part of your people, and that as your people we can worship you, come close to you, learn from your word, and give you thanks and praise. We ask for your blessing on those who seek to lead your people in the work of the people, the liturgy of the people, the worship of you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.